Snow fell over Millstone like the sky was trying to erase the town one slow flake at a time. And if you listen to the people who still live there, they will tell you that everything changed the night Emily Carter walked out into that snow and never came home. They say that if you stand on the Carter's front porch on New Year's Eve, just before midnight, you can still hear her boots on the steps, still hear the door creak open, still hear the faint echo of a girl breathing in cold air and deciding, without saying a word, that she was finally done pretending. This is not a ghost story, though Millstone likes to call it one. Ghosts are easy. They rattle in attics, flicker in mirrors, vanish at dawn. Emily did something far more dangerous. She remembered. On the edge of town, the Carter house sat with its peeling white paint and lopsided porch, slumped under a sky the color of old bruises. Inside, the last night of the year moved along in tired traditions. The television counting down in New York, a bowl of chips going stale on the coffee table, her father Jack in his recliner with a beer sweating in his hand, her mother Louise clattering dishes in the kitchen as if noise could keep all the bad thoughts away. The smell of pot roast lingered in the air, clinging to the curtains and the faded family photos on the wall, sun-faded proof that this house had once tried to be happy. In one of those frames, a younger Emily smiled with her front teeth missing, her arms wrapped around a boy with the same brown eyes. Her brother Daniel, 3 years younger, the only person in the house who didn't look like he was trying to disappear into the wallpaper. Down the hall, in a small bedroom with a crooked window, 17-year-old Emily stood in front of her mirror, but she wasn't really looking at herself. Her reflection stared back, pale skin, dark hair pulled into a messy braid, a blue sweater that had grown rough at the cuffs from too many washes. She looked like any other quiet girl in any other tired town, but something about her eyes betrayed her. They kept drifting away from her own face toward the window, toward the slice of dark outside where the woods waited like a held breath. Every New Year's, the woods bothered her. Not in the way horror movies show it, not with glowing eyes between branches or shapes darting behind trees, but with a heavy, nameless pressure. It felt like someone out there was waiting for her to remember something, and whatever that something was, her mind had built walls around it so high that even her nightmares had to knock. Louise's voice cut through the house, sharp and practiced. "Emily, you're going to be late for the party, you hear me? Roads are slick. Don't you dare try to walk home alone after midnight." Emily's hand tightened around the edge of the dresser. She wondered if her mother heard the way her own voice trembled. She wondered if Louise ever let herself think about the one thing that Emily had never said out loud. Maybe not. Millstone survived on the things people didn't say. She grabbed her worn gray coat from the hook, slid her arms into it, and reached for the door. As she opened it, Jack spoke for the first time that evening without taking his eyes off the television. "Curfew's 1," he said. Not a minute later. His words sounded casual, but they hung in the air with an odd weight, as if he were stamping something with invisible ink. Emily paused, her hand on the knob, feeling his gaze move to her without quite touching her. For a moment, she almost asked him about the woods, about the nights she woke up with the taste of snow in her teeth and the faint echo of a song she couldn't place, about why New Year's Eve made her stomach twist like she'd swallowed barbed wire. But then she saw the way his fingers tightened around the neck of the bottle and changed her mind. She had learned young that there were certain questions that made the air in their house turn sharp and sour. "Got it," she said instead and stepped outside. The cold wrapped around her like a second skin, clean and harsh. The porch boards creaked under her boots, the same tired protest they'd made for years. The street was quiet, blanketed with fresh snow that swallowed sound. Down the road, she could see the faint glow of other houses, Christmas lights still clinging to gutters like they were afraid to let go of the only color December gave them. She walked, her breath coming in small white clouds. Behind her, through the thin walls of the house, she could hear the television crowd shouting numbers as if they could force the new year into existence through volume alone. Somewhere between 8 and 9 houses down, the glow of the community hall spilled onto the street, warm and golden, smeared with silhouettes. Music thumped faintly through the walls, a dull heartbeat. Teenagers clustered near the entrance, their laughter rising and falling in messy waves. Someone had strung up a banner that read Happy 2000 in blocky glitter letters, as if Millstone believed that the new millennium would notice them and decide to be kind. Inside, the air smelled like cheap punch and nervous sweat. The old wood floor of the hall creaked under the weight of years and footsteps and unspoken grudges. Teachers who had given up on leaving town worked the snack tables, forcing smiles. Parents hovered near the back, pretending not to watch their kids too closely. Emily moved through it all like a ghost that hadn't figured out yet that she was supposed to haunt. A hand landed on her shoulder. "Hey, Em. You made it." It was Brooke, her closest thing to a friend, wearing a sparkly top that made her look like she belonged somewhere bigger. Brooke's eyeliner was too dark, her lipstick imperfect, but she carried herself like a girl who believed in cities and futures. "You good?" she asked, and the question sounded more serious than the casual way she said it. Emily almost said no. She almost poured everything out in one unstoppable flood. The sleepless nights, the image of trees pressing in on her whenever she closed her eyes, the way she sometimes woke up standing at her window with no memory of getting out of bed. But she knew how that would go. Brooke would put a hand on her arm, tell her she was stressed, that graduation was getting to her, that everyone felt weird this year with the ITWO 1000 talk and the news going on about computers crashing and planes falling from the sky. Emily would smile and say, "Yeah, you're probably right," and nothing would change, so she did what she always did. She swallowed the truth. "Yeah," she said, "I'm good, just cold." They drifted into the crowds, people talked too loudly. Someone spilled soda. The DJ cycled through songs that had already been worn thin on the radio. Emily laughed at the right moments when Brooke told a story about a substitute teacher falling asleep in class. She nodded as a boy from her math class tried to flirt in clumsy half-sentences. If anyone had really looked at her, really seen her, they would have noticed that sometimes her gaze flickered to the windows, to the black line of trees just visible beyond the parking lot lights. Each time her pulse quickened. Each time she pressed it back down. It felt like the woods were staring at her, not with the hungry curiosity of a dark forest, but with the stern patience of someone who knows they have already met you and is waiting for you to admit it. Around 11:30, the room grew wilder. Someone turned the music up too loud. Confetti cannons were brought out prematurely. People shouted over one another, the giddy desperation of people who wanted the calendar to fix what the year had broken. Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, squinting at the screen, unknown number. For a second, she considered ignoring it, but something about the timing, the way her chest tightened, made her thumb move on its own. She lifted the phone to her ear, pressing a hand over her other ear to block out the music. "Hello?" she said. There was static, just a soft crackling like someone breathing into the line from very far away. "Hello?" she repeated, her voice lower. The static shifted and then she heard it, a hum, a tune, simple, old, familiar. It took her a second to place it, and then she realized that whoever was on the other end of the line was humming the slow, mournful first bars of Auld Lang Syne, the exact song the whole room would be screaming at midnight in less than half an hour. Her stomach knotted. "Who is this?" she asked. For a moment there was no answer, just that humming, slow and deliberate like the person on the other end wanted her to hear every note. Then the humming stopped and a voice spoke. Low, male. The kind of voice that sank into your bones and pulled old things back to the surface. "You don't remember, do you?" it said. Emily's grip tightened around the phone until her fingers hurt. "Remember what?" she whispered. The boy from math bumped into her and apologized, but his words sounded far away, thin and harmless. The voice on the line let out a sound that was almost a chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "New Year's Eve," it said. "The cabin, the woods, you were always such a good girl. You did exactly what you were told, you forgot." Her throat closed. Images flickered at the edges of her mind, flashing lights, not from fireworks but from something swinging overhead. The rough texture of wood under her palms, the smell of smoke and aftershave, a song humming just out of reach. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Who is this?" she said again, louder this time, fear sharpening her voice, but the line went dead. No click, no goodbye, just silence. The music crashed back into her awareness, the room too hot, the lights too bright. She realized she was shaking. Brooke appeared at her side, eyes wide. "You okay? You look like you're going to faint." Emily forced a breath into her lungs, then another. Yeah, she lied. I just need some air. Without waiting for a response, she pushed through the throng of bodies and headed for the exit. Outside, the cold hit her like a wave. The sudden quiet made her ears ring. She stepped into the parking lot, the snow crunching underfoot, and looked toward the tree line beyond the last row of cars. The woods loomed black and unmoving, branches etched against the dim orange glow of the town's streetlights. For a moment, Emily stood there, phone still clutched in her hand, pulse pounding in her ears. She thought about going back inside, finding Brooke, telling her everything. She imagined the look on Brooke's face, confused concern, a quick glance around to see if anyone was listening, a nervous laugh as she said, "That's seriously messed up. It's probably some creep from school, just block the number." She imagined her mother's reaction if she told her. A tightening of the jaw, a sharp, fast dismissal, the way she always shut down any conversation that wandered too close to the foggy edges of Emily's childhood. And she imagined Jack's reaction most of all, the way he would go very still, the way his eyes would go dull and hard like he was looking at something that wasn't there. The way he would say, in that flat voice he used when he wanted an argument over before it began, "You're making things up again, you always were dramatic." The thought of that, of being told once again that her own mind could not be trusted, was somehow worse than the thought of stepping into the dark. A gust of wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her cheeks. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number or the same. The screen danced in her trembling hand. She didn't answer this time. Instead, she slid it into her pocket, turned away from the glowing hall, and started walking, not back toward town or home, but toward the woods. Each step felt like a decision. Behind her, music swelled, and someone shouted that it was almost time, almost midnight, almost a new year, as if the world was about to become something else and leave all its old sins behind. In front of her, the trees opened like a mouth. Snow clung to their bare branches, weighing them down. The path into the woods was faint but there, a memory her feet seemed to know even if her conscious mind did not. Her breath came faster, pluming in the frigid air. She could have turned back at any moment. She could have blamed the phone call on a prank, on her own anxious imagination. She could have walked into the hall, forced a smile, counted down from 10 with everyone else, and let the year change on paper while nothing changed in her head. But somewhere deep inside her, beyond fear, beyond confusion, deeper than even the secrets she didn't know she held, a single stubborn thought pushed forward. I am tired of not knowing, tired of the half-remembered flashes that made her wake up with her hands clenched into fists, tired of the way New Year's Eve always felt like the anniversary of something she could not name. She stepped under the trees, and the last of the town's light fell away. Branches knitted overhead, catching what little glow the sky offered. The sound of the party dulled behind her, like someone was turning the volume down on an old radio. The snow here was less disturbed, just a few animal tracks crisscrossing the ground. Her boots sank with each step, a soft, muffled crunch. The cold reached her bones. Still she walked. People in Millstone would later swear they saw her leaving the hall. Some would say she got into a dark SUV parked near the back. Others would insist they saw her arguing with someone just outside the door, gesturing toward the woods. A few would claim they saw her standing very still at the edge of the parking lot, staring into the trees as if listening to something no one else could hear. Memory is like that, soft around the edges, eager to fill gaps with whatever makes the most sense. Or the least sense, or whatever makes it easiest to sleep. What no one could say for certain was what happened once Emily stepped under the cover of those trees. There were no cameras, no witnesses. The snow kept its own counsel. All the town would ever have were the facts they could not bend. At 11:47 p.m. on New Year's Eve, in the final minutes of the old year, Emily Carter walked into the woods behind the Millstone Community Hall. She did not come back out. The first hours after Emily vanished slipped through everyone's fingers like melted snow, leaving only the cold behind. Midnight arrived without her. Fireworks cracked open the sky with hollow color. People cheered. They kissed, they laughed too loudly, pretending they didn't notice the way some of them glanced toward the woods, toward the place where the dark swallowed sound. When the last spark faded and the smoke drifted away, Millstone didn't feel like it had stepped into a new year. It felt like it had stepped into a question. The Carter house was still lit long after the other windows in town went dark. Louise paced the living room, rubbing the side of her thumb until the skin turned raw. She checked the clock. The front window, the driveway, the clock again. Curfew was 1 and 1 came and went without a sound. Jack's voice remained calm, too calm, the kind of calm that squeezed the air shut around it. "She's fine," he said, as if saying it would make it true. "She probably went with friends, kids do that." But he kept checking the door too. Every few minutes his eyes flickered toward it like a reflex he couldn't control. Daniel sat on the stairs, half hidden in the shadows, his heart beating so loudly he was sure they could hear it. He listened to their parents' voices rise and fall, watched worry tighten the skin around his mother's mouth. He tried to picture Emily laughing somewhere, wrapped up in borrowed blankets, falling asleep in a warm house that wasn't theirs. But that image wouldn't stay. Whenever he tried to see it, he somehow saw snow instead. At 2:07 a.m., the phone rang. Louise leapt for it so quickly she almost tripped. "Hello?" Her voice cracked on the single word. The voice on the other end belonged to the parent of a girl from school. No, they hadn't seen Emily. Yes, they would call if they did. "Happy New Year," they added awkwardly, as if politeness could make the moment less wrong. By 3, the house felt thinner, like the walls themselves were listening. By 4, the silence had teeth. Morning did not bring comfort. It brought light, and the light revealed the same empty driveway, the same icy street, the same crooked porch steps leading nowhere. Emily's room looked untouched, like a stage set left behind after the audience went home. Her bed remained smooth, blanket folded carefully at the end. A mug sat on her nightstand from earlier, a faint ring left behind where warm cocoa had once been. Her sketchbook was gone. Louise ran her hands over the bed as if expecting to feel warmth, some trace of a body that had been there recently. There was none. When the police finally arrived, they looked tired before they even stepped inside. Millstone didn't get many missing persons cases, but they got enough to know how these things usually went. Runaways, arguments, kids leaving for bigger cities with more lights. They asked their questions in the careful, practiced voices of people who have said the same things many times. When did you last see her? Was she upset? Did she have a boyfriend? Did she ever talk about leaving? Louise answered with shaking hands pressed together. Jack answered with short, clipped sentences and eyes that refused to meet the officers too long. Daniel noticed that, even if no one else did. Outside, squad cars idled, their exhaust curling into the cold morning. Neighbors peeked through curtains, then decided curtains weren't enough and wandered outside to stand at the edge of the driveway with their arms folded tight, wearing expressions that pretended to be concerned but carried a quiet, eager spark. News traveled fast. By noon, flyers were being printed at the library. A printer jammed and someone cursed under their breath. Volunteers gathered in the church basement, sipping weak coffee, listening to instructions that sounded more like prayers. "Stay in pairs, call if you find anything, don't touch evidence." Search lines formed, boots broke the pristine surface of the snow, the woods absorbed them with indifference. Dogs sniffed, whining softly, confused. Emily's name became something people said over and over until it lost its shape and turned into sound. They found tracks. They followed them. For a while, the footprints told a simple story. A girl walking steadily into the trees, not stumbling, not running, just walking. Then, without warning, the story stopped. The prints faded where the wind had carved the snow into small waves. They reappeared faintly, then vanished again entirely. The ground beyond was unmarked, smooth, as if nothing had ever crossed it. Officers stood there for a long moment, scanning the area, frowning at nothing. A paramedic muttered something about drifting snow. A deputy suggested she may have turned back another way. Everyone nodded because they needed explanations, even weak ones. Back at the Carter house, the police taped a map to the dining table and began marking sections. Radios crackled constantly. Advice poured in from people who had never been trained in anything but certainty. "Check the quarry, look by the old tracks. Kids hang out near the water tower." Every suggestion carried a strange undercurrent of excitement, as if people were grateful to have something to talk about that wasn't their own lives. After 2 days, casseroles began to appear on the front porch like offerings. After 3, the reporters came. They stood on the street with microphones and sad, professional eyes practicing the cadence of tragedy. They said words like community and mystery and prayers. They filmed the front door, waiting for it to open. Inside, Louise stopped sleeping. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter the police had returned to her, copied, scanned, documented, then given back like something suddenly harmless. Sometimes she read it. Sometimes she only held it, pressing it to her chest as if the paper could somehow connect her to the girl who had written it. Jack began avoiding the kitchen. He stayed in the living room with the television turned up too loud, absorbing whatever news would drown out the one story he couldn't escape. He snapped at reporters, snapped at volunteers, snapped at Daniel for breathing too loudly, then apologized, then snapped again. Daniel floated through those days like someone half awake, half dreaming. Every room he entered felt like it had lost something invisible. He tried to go to school, but the whispers followed him down the halls. "That's her brother. I heard she ran away. I heard someone took her." Teachers looked at him with too much pity. Friends didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. He found himself replaying every small memory of Emily, searching for clues, as if he could retroactively change the past by paying closer attention. He remembered her sitting on the porch last summer, staring into the woods longer than seemed normal. He remembered the way she sometimes flinched when the clock hit midnight on New Year's in previous years, as if the sound itself hurt. He remembered finding her once in the middle of the night, standing barefoot by the window staring out. He had asked what she was doing. She had blinked, confused, and said she didn't know. On the 4th day, Detective Harris, a man with thinning hair and a voice like gravel, sat down with Daniel alone. They spoke quietly in the living room while the television whispered in the background. "Your sister's letter," Harris said, folding his hands. "She talks about dreams, nightmares. Did she ever talk to you about them?" Daniel shook his head. "Not really." "Did she ever say she was afraid of anyone?" Another shake, a pause. "She was weird about New Year's," he said finally, and the words felt like a betrayal. "She hated it. I don't know why." Harris nodded as if that made sense in a way Daniel didn't understand. "Sometimes trauma hides itself," the detective said. "Sometimes the mind keeps secrets it thinks it has to keep to survive." Daniel's fingers twisted in the hem of his sleeve. "So, do you think someone hurt her?" Like before, Harris didn't answer right away. He looked toward the kitchen where Louise sat at the table with red eyes and a 1,000-yard stare. Then toward the hallway where Jack paced restlessly, pretending not to eavesdrop. "We don't know," he said. "We're trying to find out." It wasn't the truth Daniel wanted, but it was the only one anyone was willing to give. Days turned into weeks, posters curled at the corners. Volunteers drifted back into their routines. Snow melted, then refroze, burying and unburying the same pieces of ground. The town learned how to live with a missing girl the way people learn to live with a scar. They stopped touching it as often, but they still avoided mirrors. Beneath it all, though, a murmur ran through Millstone, quiet, persistent, suspicious. People avoided saying Jack's name too loudly. They whispered about the argument someone claimed they heard the night before she vanished. They wondered, in looks rather than words, whether the danger had always been inside the house they had driven past every day without thinking. They wondered, then pretended they hadn't. And somewhere out there, beyond the last streetlight, the woods stood unchanged, watching, keeping whatever they knew exactly where they had always kept it. Under the snow, under the silence, under the part of the story no one was yet ready to hear. Dr. Evelyn Crane lived in a small house at the far edge of town, a place most people didn't notice until they needed it, and by the time the police finally arrived at her door, the case had already taken up quiet residence in every corner of her mind. She listened as Detective Harris explained why they were there, his voice steady but softened by something like respect. When he finished, she didn't speak right away. She folded her hands and stared past him as if she could see another version of the conversation happening years earlier, when the warning signs had first begun. Emily came to me because she thought she was losing her mind, Dr. Crane said at last. But she wasn't. Her mind was doing exactly what it needed to do. It was protecting her. They sat in her office, surrounded by books stacked in tired, uneven towers. A clock ticked faintly on the wall. Nothing about the room looked threatening. That had always been the point. She said she had dreams, Harris prompted gently. Dr. Crane nodded. Dreams that felt like memories, but broken, out of order. She'd see flashes, a doorway, a table, bare bulbs, someone humming, always around New Year's, always the snow. Every time she tried to look directly at the memory, something inside her slammed the door shut. She'd wake up crying without knowing why. Harris scribbled notes, though he already knew the shape of this story. He had seen it before, in different towns with different names, always wrapped in the same silence. Did she mention anyone? She didn't trust her memory enough to name anyone, Dr. Crane replied. But she did say something I couldn't ignore. She told me she had the feeling that the people she should have been safest with were the ones who scared her most. Harris swallowed. Meaning family. Dr. Crane didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached for a folder, then hesitated. You need to understand something. Memory is fragile, especially when it has been tampered with not by hypnosis or chemicals, but by repeated denial. Imagine a child says something terrifying and the response is, "That didn't happen, you dreamed it, stop lying." Enough years of that and the brain learns to bury it. It hides the truth in a locked room and pretends the room doesn't exist. Harris looked at the folder. Did Emily unlock the room? Not completely, Dr. Crane said softly. She was afraid that if she did, she wouldn't be believed. She said it had happened before. Back at the Carter house, Daniel sat on the edge of his bed with the letter in his lap, reading it again, even though he knew every line by heart. He traced the ink with his finger as if he could reach through the paper and into the version of his sister who had written it. He felt guilty, like he had missed something obvious. Like there had been messages hidden in the spaces between her words for years, and he hadn't learned to read them until she was gone. Down the hall, he heard Jack slam a cabinet. Heard his mother say his name in that thin, pleading way she had lately. Heard the exhaustion in both their voices, one brittle with grief, the other thick with something darker that Daniel couldn't yet name. That night, as snow began to fall again, sleep refused to come. He lay awake listening to the house creak, each sound magnified into a threat. At some point, he got up and walked into Emily's room. The air still smelled faintly like old perfume and pencil shavings. He sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the window with its faint frost pattern. That was when he noticed the small hairline scratches on the wood near her desk drawer. Not new, subtle, like someone had opened and closed it again and again while nervous. He opened it slowly. Inside were ordinary things, pens, folded notes from school, little doodles, but tucked beneath the pencil cup was a business card. Dr. Evelyn Crane, Trauma Counseling. On the back, written in Emily's careful handwriting, were 3 words, "Don't tell Mom." Morning came heavy. Detective Harris sat across from Jack at the dining table while Louise hovered nearby, wringing her hands. Your daughter was seeing a therapist, Harris said. Did you know that? Jack stiffened. His expression soured then hardened. We didn't authorize that, he said. We would have known if she needed help. Louise closed her eyes briefly as if the words hurt. She never said anything, she whispered. She never told me. Harris leaned forward slightly. Sometimes kids don't, especially if they think they won't be believed. The silence that followed was short but sharp. Jack looked away. She's dramatic, he muttered. Always has been, reads those books, writes those dark stories. She gets ideas in her head and they stick. Sometimes, Harris replied carefully, the ideas are there because something put them there. Jack's jaw tightened. His chair scraped the floor as he stood. Are you accusing me of something, detective? Louise stepped in quickly, her voice shaking. Please don't, we just want our daughter back. Harris nodded. So do I. As he left, he caught Daniel's eye in the hallway and saw the same heavy truth forming there that had been forming in his own thoughts. People in town began to talk more quietly, as if the air itself had grown dangerous. They no longer said Emily's name in full sentences. They dropped it like a fragile thing, wrapping it in phrases like that situation and what happened. The search scaled back. The volunteers dwindled. Posters grew faded and peeled, and the town learned to talk about everything except the thing that lingered just beneath every conversation. Until the night Emily came back. It was raining instead of snowing, the drops icy and thin, whispering against the windows as the Carters sat in their living room pretending to watch television. The knock at the door came soft but steady. 3 times, Louise froze. Jack's hand tightened on the remote. Daniel felt something inside him snap to attention. The second knock came. Louise moved first, crossing the room like she was being pulled by a string. When she opened the door, the world tilted. Emily stood on the porch. She looked like herself and not like herself at all. Same face but hollowed, same eyes but older as if she had lived years in days. Wet hair clung to her cheeks. Her coat hung loosely from her shoulders. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice was quiet, flat, almost apologetic. Louise screamed her name and wrapped her in trembling arms. Jack moved to them, his expression flickering between relief and something that looked suspiciously like fear. Daniel stood rooted to the spot, heart pounding, tears burning his eyes. He wanted to run to her. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but something in the way she stood kept him still. She didn't lean into the hug, she didn't cry. She let the embrace happen like an appointment she had expected. When the police arrived minutes later, their excitement filled the room, bright and invasive. They asked their questions gently at first, then more insistently when she gave nothing. "Where were you? Who took you? Did anyone hurt you?" Emily looked past them at the window, at the darkness beyond the glass, and said the same words each time. "I can't talk about it." "Why not?" "Because you already know." Confusion moved through the room like a chill. Doctors examined her. There were no fresh bruises, no obvious signs of abuse, no malnutrition. She looked, medically speaking, fine, but eyes tell stories skin refuses to tell, and Emily's eyes were shattered glass. Back in her room that night, she sat on the bed with the lights blazing, staring at the door as if expecting it to move. Daniel brought her water, unsure what else to do. He lingered. He whispered. "Where did you go?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, in a voice that sounded distant, she said, "I think I've always been there." He didn't know what that meant, but it scared him more than anything he had ever heard. In the weeks that followed, the town shifted again. Relief turned into suspicion. Gratitude curdled into doubt. People murmured in grocery aisles that maybe she'd run off and regretted it. Maybe she was lying to get attention. Maybe she liked the chaos. No one wanted to ask the harder question: what if she told the truth when she said they already knew? Late at night, Daniel heard her whispering in her sleep. Sometimes he woke to the sound of her sobbing without tears, breath trapped in her throat. Sometimes she muttered fragments. "He said I'd forget. He said it was a game. Don't tell, don't tell." Each time, Daniel pressed his ear to her door, feeling anger braid with fear in his chest. One evening, as New Year's crept toward the calendar again, Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring down at a cup of untouched tea. Jack hovered nearby. Louise fussed with plates just to have something to do with her hands. "We can move," Jack said suddenly. "Start fresh." Emily didn't look up. "You can't outrun something that's already inside the house," she said softly. The silence that fell then was so complete that Daniel could hear the clock ticking from the living room. Jack's expression darkened. His hand curled into a fist on the table, then slowly relaxed. "Don't start this again," he said, and the way he said again made Daniel's skin crawl. Emily finally raised her eyes. They were steady, tired. "Dangerous? I didn't start it," she replied. "You did." And for the first time, Daniel saw fear in his father's face. Not fear of losing a daughter, not fear for her safety, fear of something else, fear of something returning. That was the night Daniel realized that Emily's story wasn't about her disappearing. It was about what had been stolen long before she walked into the woods, and whether anyone in Millstone was brave enough to face the truth when it finally forced its way to the surface. The snow came back the way it always did in Millstone, without asking permission, without caring who it buried or what it covered. And as the year crept closer to another New Year's Eve, the air in the Carter house grew so tight and thin it felt like breathing inside a sealed jar. Emily moved differently now. She walked through rooms like someone measuring distance, memorizing exits. She flinched at unexpected sounds, but it wasn't the overreaction of someone fragile. It was the controlled recoil of someone who had learned to survive by paying attention. Daniel watched her in quiet pieces. The way her fingers trembled when the television played a commercial with fireworks, the way she always knew exactly where their father was in the house without looking, the way her eyes hardened whenever someone said the word celebrate. What nobody outside noticed, but Daniel did, was that she spent more time staring out the window again, always in the same direction. Toward the woods. One afternoon, when the light was already fading even though it was barely past 3, Daniel saw her put on her coat and boots with a resolution that made his chest tighten. She didn't say where she was going. She just opened the front door and stepped out into the pale world, not even pretending to be casual. Something inside him whispered that this time, if he let her go alone, she might not come back at all. He grabbed his own jacket and followed, careful to leave enough distance that she wouldn't hear his steps over the muted crunch of snow. The cold bit at his cheeks, turning his breath into clouds that soon shrank behind him. Emily didn't look back once. The town slipped away quickly. Houses thinned out, streetlights ended, and the road devolved into a narrow ribbon swallowed by trees. Daniel had walked this way a handful of times in his life, usually with groups of kids daring each other to go deeper into the woods, telling stories about monsters and ghosts. All of those stories felt childish now, flimsy costumes thrown over the thing he was really afraid of. Emily veered off the road at a point where the tree line dipped slightly, stepping over a ditch and into the forest. The world changed as soon as she passed beneath the first arch of branches. Sound softened. Light dimmed. Daniel's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then followed, his boots sinking deeper into the untouched snow. They walked in silence. The only evidence of movement was the twin line of tracks trailing behind them, 2 snakes carving a path through white. Every few steps, Emily's shoulders tensed like she expected to recognize something and hated that she did. The deeper they went, the more Daniel felt like the woods were not an ordinary place, but a kind of borderland between the life he knew and the one his sister had lived in pieces. After what felt like an hour but was probably less, the trees opened into a small clearing, and there it was, the cabin. It sat low to the ground, hunched under a sagging roof, the boards warped and blackened in places. One of the windows was broken, a jagged hole in a blank face. The door lined slightly off its hinges, the paint mostly peeled away, leaving gray wood beneath like exposed bone. Daniel had seen this kind of building in scary stories, in movies set in the middle of nowhere, but seeing it in real life, knowing it existed behind his town, made his stomach flip. Emily stopped at the edge of the clearing and stared. Her breath came faster now, more visible. Her hands were clenched at her sides. "This is it," she said quietly, but she wasn't talking to him. Her voice sounded distant, like it had traveled a long way to reach the surface. Daniel moved closer, his eyes darting between her and the cabin. "You've been here before?" he asked, even though he could already feel the answer in the way the air throbbed with something ugly and old. She nodded once. "When I was little," she murmured, "I thought it was a bad dream, but bad dreams don't stay the same every year." Those words lodged in his chest. He watched as she forced herself forward, each step a struggle against some invisible resistance. The porch boards creaked as she stepped onto them, the sound echoing faintly in the quiet clearing. She reached for the door and pushed. It groaned but gave way, swinging inward on rusty hinges. The smell that came out hit them both at once. Damp wood, mold, and something beneath it, sour and metallic, a ghost of past sweat and smoke. Emily flinched, but her feet didn't move backward. Daniel followed her inside. The cabin's interior was dim, the weak winter light spilling in through cracks in the broken window, painting long, thin stripes across the floor. Dust floated in the air, slow and heavy. There wasn't much furniture. A few old chairs, a tipped-over crate, and in the center of the room, a table. The table was scarred with deep gouges and dark stains that the years hadn't completely erased. Bolted to its sides were leather straps, cracked and stiff, hanging like dead snakes. Daniel's mind tried to reject what his eyes saw. It tried to insist that those straps were for something innocent, that the stains were from spilled drinks or hunting gear, anything but what his gut told him they were. Emily stepped closer. Her fingers hovered just above the surface of the table, trembling before finally resting on the wood. The moment her skin made contact, she sucked in a sharp breath. Her eyes squeezed shut and her shoulders shook. Daniel moved toward her, reaching out like he might catch her if she fell. He whispered, maybe we should go. We can call the police. They can. They already know, she said through gritted teeth, the same words she'd used in the house, but this time they sounded less like defiance and more like revelation. Her face tightened as images, long buried, surged up with violent clarity. The cabin filled with echoes only she could hear, men's voices, laughter that wasn't happy, the clink of bottles, the smell of sweat and cheap cologne. Boots stomping snow from their soles. She saw herself at 9 years old, small and trusting, excited when her father said they were going somewhere special. A little New Year's celebration, he'd told her, ruffling her hair. Just some friends, you like fireworks, don't you? She had nodded because she did. She remembered the ride in the car, the way the dark pressed against the windows, the way he hummed under his breath. Not a lullaby, not a random tune. The New Year's song, Auld Lang Syne. When they arrived at the cabin, she had been cold and sleepy. The men had greeted her with big voices, calling her kiddo and princess, offering her soda with too much ice. She remembered feeling special for being included in something the adults did. Then the room had changed. The energy shifted. The jokes had turned sharper. The way they looked at her had made her feel like a bug pinned under glass. Emily's hands curled into fists on the table as the memory slammed into her, the straps being fastened around her wrists, her ankles, the laughter when she cried, the way one of the men, she couldn't see his face clearly, but she remembered the smell of his aftershave, had leaned over her and said, "Don't worry. You won't remember a thing, that's the magic of this little ritual." Ritual, as if hurting her was some twisted tradition. She remembered trying to call out for her father, remembered seeing him in the corner, holding a drink, looking away. That hurt most of all. Not the hands or the words, but the way he refused to meet her eyes as if she were something he could choose not to see. The memories came in jagged flashes, not all of them complete, but enough. Enough to know this was not a one-time horror. It had happened more than once, always around the new year, always here. The cabin, the table, the straps, they were part of a pattern carved into her mind, then buried under layers of denial. They said it was a game, she whispered, her voice cracking. They said I was imagining things. They said I made it up afterwards when I tried to tell. Daniel's stomach churned. Who? He asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Emily opened her eyes and looked at him. Tears streaked down her cheeks, but there was something else in her gaze too now, fury. Dad, she said, and his friends. The ground seemed to tilt beneath Daniel. He shook his head instinctively as if that could change her answer. No, he muttered. He wouldn't. He did, she said, and Mom helped without even knowing she helped. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. Every time I tried to tell her bits and pieces growing up, she shushed me, told me I had a bad dream, told me to stop saying things like that about my father. After a while, it's easier to believe them than yourself. Daniel felt sick. A memory surfaced. Emily at 12, sitting at the kitchen table, saying she didn't want to go to some cabin with Dad on New Year's anymore. Louise had scolded her for being ungrateful, for making a fuss when Jack just wanted to spend time with her. Daniel hadn't thought about that moment in years. Now it burned. The night I disappeared, Emily continued, staring at the table like she could see her smaller self lying there, I remembered enough to know I had to do something. The phone call at the party, it wasn't random. He called to remind me. To warn me, but it backfired. Who called? Daniel asked. One of them, she said. I still don't know exactly which. Their voices blur together after a while, but whoever it was, he panicked when I confronted him. I came back here to this cabin, thinking I could make him tell the truth or stop him or something. I was stupid. You're not stupid, Daniel said automatically, but his voice trembled too much to sound convincing. He locked me in a basement, she went on quietly. Not here, somewhere else, another property, maybe his, maybe someone else's. It smelled like dust and oil. I lost track of time. No windows, no clocks. Sometimes he came down. Sometimes he talked like everything was normal. Brought me food. Told me no one was looking for me as hard as I thought. that if I went home and started telling stories, they'd say I ran away and I'd end up in some institution. So the best thing for everyone was for me to forget, the way I always had. Daniel's hands shook. He wanted to punch something, scream, break every rotting board in this cabin, but the weight of what she was saying pressed him still. How did you get out? He asked. Emily's jaw tightened. He died, she said. I heard the commotion upstairs one day, voices, then nothing. Hours went by, no one came. Eventually, someone else came down. They looked at me like I was a problem they didn't know what to do with. She drew a shaky breath. They drove me back to town, left me near the edge of Millstone, told me to go home and keep my mouth shut for my own good. That nobody needed their life ruined over old misunderstandings. The phrase made Daniel's skin crawl. He could hear it in his father's mouth, in that careful, measured tone he used when he wanted something ugly to sound reasonable. So when you said we already knew, Daniel whispered, the pieces clicking together with brutal clarity, I meant that the people who should have protected me are the ones who pretended for years that nothing was wrong, Emily finished. I meant that this town has been looking away for a long time. They left the cabin in silence. The air outside felt sharper now, the snow brighter and more cruel. Daniel's mind raced as they trudged back through the trees. He imagined walking into the police station, describing the cabin, the table, the straps, everything his sister had told him. He imagined the looks on their faces. Some would believe her, some would hesitate. Because the men she was accusing weren't random strangers. They were fathers, businessmen, church deacons, men people trusted. Men like Jack Carter, who had always known how to smile in public and scowl at home. Back at the house, the warmth felt wrong. The living room seemed smaller. Jack sat in his chair, the television flickering nonsense across his unreadable face. When he saw Emily and Daniel step in, covered in snow, his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Where have you two been? He asked. His voice was casual, but it rode on a wire of tension. Emily met his gaze head-on, no flinching, no shrinking. Out, she said, remembering. For a second, Daniel saw something like panic flash through his father's eyes, quickly smothered by anger. I'm not doing this again, Jack said. We've been through enough. We haven't even started, Emily replied. Louise emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face pale. What's going on? She asked, looking back and forth between them. The space between that question and the answer felt like standing on cracked ice. Emily took a slow breath, as if gathering every remaining piece of courage she had. Mom, she said, her voice shaking but steady, do you remember the cabin? The dish towel slipped from Louise's fingers and dropped to the floor. The color drained from her face. For the first time, Daniel realized that maybe his mother did know something, if not the whole truth, then enough. Enough to have seen cracks and chosen to plaster over them rather than dig. Enough to have heard a child's fear and labeled it imagination because the alternative was too terrible to face. Emily, Louise whispered, we are not going to start talking crazy in this house. Emily's laugh was small and broken. Crazy is what happens when you have to pretend it didn't happen, she said. I'm done pretending. If you won't listen, someone else will. Jack stepped forward, his temper rising like a storm front. You will not drag this family's name through the mud because you have bad dreams, he snapped. You understand me? You will not run around town telling stories about things that never. I remember the straps, Emily cut in, and the words hit the room like a gunshot. I remember the song, I remember you looking away. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the television seemed to understand it needed to quiet down. Jack's mouth opened, then closed, his fists clenched at his sides. For a moment, it looked like he might deny it outright. Then his shoulders dropped a fraction, and in that tiny movement, Daniel saw something worse than denial, calculation. Jack wasn't shocked, he was cornered. You don't know what you're saying, he muttered. You were a child, you misunderstood. I was a child, Emily agreed, tears spilling over now, anger and hurt twisting together in every line of her face. That's exactly why it was your job not to let it happen. When they went to the police, when Emily sat in that too-bright room with its humming fluorescent lights and told Detective Harris everything she could remember, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Harris listened without interrupting, his pen moving slowly, his eyes growing darker with each detail. When she described the cabin, his jaw tightened. When she mentioned names, not always clearly, but enough to draw lines between her father and a handful of men whose reputations had never been publicly questioned, he swore under his breath, so softly it was almost inaudible. "We'll need evidence," he said when she finished, his voice thick. "More than this, I believe you. But the people you're accusing, this town has let them be untouchable for a long time." Emily nodded. "Then start by looking in the places everyone pretends not to see," she said. "Start with the cabin." And somewhere already the truth had begun to move, slow but unstoppable, like thaw water working its way beneath a frozen river, ready to crack it open whether Millstone wanted it to or not. Detective Harris drove out to the cabin 2 days later with a pair of deputies and a search warrant that felt too thin against what he suspected they were about to step into. The road narrowed as they went, trees closing in, and the deputies fell quiet in that unspoken way cops do when they sense something old and rotten waiting behind a door. When they reached the clearing, the cabin looked smaller than he had imagined, almost pitiful, the kind of structure you might overlook if you didn't already know its name, its purpose, its history carved into grain and bone. Harris stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, breath fogging out in slow clouds. "Looks abandoned," one deputy said, "because people always say obvious things when they're standing on the edge of something they can't undo." "Nothing's ever really abandoned," Harris replied. "It's just waiting for someone to notice it again." They approached. The door groaned open with the same sound their boots made pressing into the snow, old, reluctant, resigned. Inside, the smell hit them first. Stale dampness, dust, the faint metallic trace that no amount of time truly erases. Harris's eyes landed on the table. Even from across the room, it radiated something ugly. The scratched wood, the bolted straps, the dark stains that time had only softened, not cleansed. He walked toward it slowly, like one might approach a grave that wasn't entirely finished with its dead. He ran a gloved finger along the surface, then turned to the deputies. "Photograph everything," he said, "every inch." They worked in silence, cameras flashing, rulers placed, bags opened, evidence markers set down like small yellow confessions. It would take time, maybe months, before lab results confirmed anything. Time Millstone would spend pretending none of this was happening. Outside the cabin, the wind hissed through the trees as if whispering that this was only the beginning. When news of the investigation leaked, it didn't spread, it infected. People lowered their voices in diners. They leaned over grocery carts to speak. They used coded phrases. They said, "Have you heard?" And "I hope it's not true," and those kinds of things don't happen here, even though deep down, most of them knew they always could and sometimes did. Jack became a man under observation, not officially. Not by paperwork, but by glances, by the way conversations stopped when he walked into rooms, by the way some longtime friends avoided his eyes, he noticed, and resentment simmered. At home, it boiled. He drank more, talked less. His silence was not peaceful. It hummed like power lines before a storm. Louise moved through the house with the shrinking gait of someone who kept walking into walls she pretended not to see. She busied herself with pointless tasks, reorganizing drawers, scrubbing already clean counters, as if she could scrub the past out of the wood the same way. Each day added another wrinkle of denial across her expression. Emily withdrew further. The more she spoke to detectives, the quieter she became in the house. She spent hours writing, filling notebook after notebook with descriptions, sketches, timelines, half-remembered names. Sometimes Daniel saw her stop mid-sentence, staring into the middle distance with that hollowed look he had come to dread, then slowly continue, like she was carefully digging with a small, fragile shovel into ground she knew could collapse at any moment. One evening, Harris returned with something in his eyes Daniel hadn't seen before, grim confirmation. He sat at the kitchen table, spread photos across the wood surface, the same table where the family had eaten dinners and pretended to be normal and spoke quietly. "We found residues on the straps," he said, "traces of adhesive, fibers consistent with children's clothing and something else faint, degraded, but there." He didn't say blood at first. He didn't have to. The room already heard it. Louise pressed a hand to her mouth. Jack stared at the photographs but didn't lean closer, like distance could protect him from implication. "So what does that prove?" Jack asked, voice more bark than question. "Kids come out here all the time. Teenagers, they mess around, could be anything." Harris met his gaze evenly. "Teenagers don't usually bolt medical-grade restraints to a table." The silence that followed had weight. It pressed down on every chest in the room. Later that night, when the house should have been sleeping, Jack cornered Emily in the hallway. The lamp behind him threw his face partly into shadow, and for the first time, she saw the man he had always been when no one else was looking, without the practiced smiles and friendly nods. "You are ruining this family," he said in a low voice. "Whatever happened to you, whatever you think happened, should have stayed between us." Emily didn't step back, she didn't cry. She felt fear. Yes, fear is stubborn. It stays even when you understand it, but something else now lived beneath it. A backbone made of anger and survival. "It never was between us," she said quietly. "It was done to me. That makes it mine to speak." His jaw flexed. For a second, his hand twitched as if he might reach for her. Then, almost as quickly, he let it fall. He knew the world was watching now, and men like him didn't like to be seen. The investigation expanded. Names surfaced. Two other men, one a local business owner, the other a former council member, were quietly brought in for questioning. They denied everything with the smooth confidence of people accustomed to their words being taken as truth. Their lawyers spoke of hysteria, false memories, suggestion. They said Dr. Crane had planted ideas in a fragile mind. They said the town was eating its own. Emily sat through it all, breathing slowly, hands clasped tight enough to leave crescent marks in her palms. Harris warned her gently that even with evidence, even with testimony, the road ahead would be brutal. Cross-examinations, character attacks, times where it would feel like she was the one on trial. "They will say you made it up," he said. "They will say you wanted attention. They will question every decision you've ever made." "They already did all of that," Emily replied softly. "When I was 9, word reached the courthouse steps before the court itself. Reporters arrived again, more of them this time, circling like crows. Camera lenses blinked. Microphones stretched forward. Words like allegations, scandal, community trust filled the air. Millstone, a town that had long prided itself on being quiet, suddenly found its secrets shouted through metal and glass. Louise stopped attending church. The looks had become too much. Mrs. Hill from 2 doors down stopped dropping off casseroles. Mr. Talbot, who had known Jack since high school, pretended not to see him at the gas station. People began constructing their own memories to fit whichever version of reality felt safest. Some swore they had always thought something was off about those men. Others insisted they had never suspected a thing and refused to believe it now. Daniel learned that truth doesn't divide a town cleanly. It frays it, splits it into strands of loyalty and guilt and denial and quiet, hidden relief. One night, unable to sleep, he found Emily sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, staring across the yard. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals. "Do you ever wish you hadn't remembered?" he asked. She was quiet for a long time. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Remembering hurts in ways forgetting never did, but forgetting was killing me." Slow, he sat beside her. "Do you think they'll go to jail?" She watched the snow melt on the railing under the porch light. "I think they'll do everything they can not to," she said. "And I think some people will help them because admitting what happened means admitting they lived beside monsters and didn't notice, or didn't want to." The trial took months to prepare, evidence from the cabin. The cassette tape Daniel had found in the attic, the one labeled New Year Party that when played stripped the room of all pretense. Laughter, clinking bottles, the hum of the song, a girl crying. And then Jack's voice, unmistakable, saying the words he had once uttered without shame. "She won't remember." When Harris first heard it in the evidence room, he closed his eyes and pictured every daughter he had ever seen in every case he had ever worked. The little hands, the lost looks. He felt older than he ever had. In court, the tape played for the jury, for the judge, for a town that had spent its life pretending certain lines could never be crossed. The sound filled the space, echoing off wood and law and denial. Louise wept openly. Jack's face tightened into something that wasn't quite remorse. Regret, maybe, but not for what he had done, for being caught. The defense argued memory distortion. They dragged Emily through years of questions, picking at inconsistencies, asking her to relive moments that already cost her everything. She answered carefully. When she cried, she didn't hide it. When she faltered, she paused, then continued. Truth, she discovered, does not need to be dramatic. It only needs to be steady. The verdict didn't come fast. Nothing in Millstone ever did. But when it did arrive, when the words guilty finally left the judge's mouth, the room didn't erupt. It exhaled, quietly, heavily, like the town itself had been holding a breath it didn't know it was holding. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Some people hugged. Others walked away, shaking their heads, clinging to the idea that the world made more sense yesterday than it did today. Emily stood on the steps for a long moment, feeling the weight of winter press against her face. Daniel stood beside her. Harris offered a small nod, not congratulations, not celebration, but acknowledgement. It wasn't victory. Not really. There were years she would never get back, scars invisible to most eyes, anniversaries that would ache in her bones every December. But there was something else, too, a crack in the silence. A wound opened to air so it could finally heal instead of fester. That night, alone in her room, she switched off the lights for the first time since she had returned. Darkness settled, not like a threat, but like a curtain. Outside, snow whispered across the ground, soft and relentless. In houses all across Millstone, people lay awake, hearing things they had ignored for too long. The creak of their own floors, the echo of broken promises, the idea that midnight does not reset what was done in daylight. And somewhere in the woods, the cabin stood empty, cold, stripped of its secrecy. It would rot now, plank by plank, until it was swallowed by earth. But the memory of it would not. Memory, once uncovered, refuses to sleep again. In the months after the verdict, Millstone tried to move on the way people try to walk normally after breaking a bone, pretending the limp isn't there, insisting the pain is better now, hoping no one notices the way every step still hurts. At first, the town buzzed with the aftermath. There were articles in regional papers, a brief feature on local television, a flood of online comments from people who had never set foot in Millstone but now had opinions about it. Some called Emily brave, others called her confused. A few called her a liar outright, safely tucked behind screens and fake names, but noise doesn't last forever. Noise gets tired. And when it faded, what remained was quieter, heavier, more permanent. The way people crossed the street to avoid certain conversations, the way parents held their children a little closer at night, the way the woods behind the community hall felt different now, not because the trees had changed, but because people finally understood what had once been hidden among them. The cabin was dismantled by court order. A crew came out with saws and hammers, and the sound of wood splitting echoed through the forest like belated justice. They took the table apart first, carefully, as if even in death it might still do harm. The straps were cut and bagged. The boards were taken away. When they were done, only an outline remained on the earth where the structure had stood, a bare patch of ground surrounded by trees that seemed to lean in, as if curious about the sudden absence. Harris stood there watching, his breath pluming in the cold air, hands buried in his pockets. One of the workers wiped sweat from his forehead despite the chill. Feels wrong, tearing it down, the man said quietly. Like we're trying to pretend it wasn't here. Harris shook his head. It'll always be here, he replied. We're just making sure nobody uses it again. Emily didn't go to see it demolished. When Daniel asked if she wanted to, she shook her head, looking out the window toward town instead of toward the woods. I've seen it enough, she said. It's in my head, that's the one I have to deal with. Her battles had shifted now, moved inward. There were no witnesses in the courtroom of her mind, no verdicts that could be read out loud. Some days she could go hours without thinking of the cabin at all. She would read, help Louise cook, sit on the back steps with Daniel and watch late sunlight slant across the snow, and it almost felt like a normal life. Then something small, an offhand joke, a certain smell, the way a door closed, would send her tumbling back into old fear, her heart racing, her palms damp, the room suddenly too small. Dr. Crane remained a constant. Her office became a place not for remembering in jagged, panicked flashes, but for learning how to live with the remembering. The goal isn't to erase it. Dr. Crane told her one day as rain drummed steadily against the window. The goal is for it to stop controlling you when it shows up. Trauma is like someone pounding on a locked door. You can either spend your life pushing your weight against it, or you can open it, look at what's inside, and decide where it belongs. Emily stared at her hands. I'm afraid that if I open it all the way, there won't be anything left of me, she admitted. You're still here now, Dr. Crane said gently. You're not what was done to you, you're what you did afterward. It wasn't a magic fix. There were no magic fixes, but over time the nightmares changed. They didn't stop, they rarely stopped, but they lost some of their teeth. In them, she was still in the cabin sometimes, still strapped down, still hearing the song hum around her like a taunt. But now, in some dreams, the door burst open. In some, she freed her own wrists. In a few, Daniel was there, grabbing her hand, pulling her into the cold air. Seats in the sanctuary of her mind slowly shifted. Shame, which had always sat in the front row, began to move further back, replaced by something else. The knowledge that the guilt she had carried for years had never belonged to her at all. Louise's journey was different and in some ways harder. The law had never pointed a finger at her. There had been no charges, no handcuffs, no courtroom scenes with her name in bold on any docket. But there was the hushed question that followed her wherever she went. How could she not have known? She asked herself that over and over in the small hours when the house was silent and there was no one left to perform for. She replayed moments she had dismissed as bad dreams, times when Emily had dissolved into tears after New Year's, words she herself had spoken. You're making things up, you're being dramatic, your father loves you. In the harsh light of hindsight, those phrases looked like bright flags marking all the places she had chosen comfort over truth. I didn't want to believe it, she confessed one evening at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she had long since stopped drinking from. The ceramic had gone cold, like the food on her plate. Emily sat across from her, fingers tracing the rim of her own glass. I know, she said softly. There was no accusation in her voice now, just a worn-out kind of sadness. It's easier to call a child a liar than to look at the person you married and see a stranger. Louise's eyes filled with tears. I failed you, she choked out. I did the one thing a mother isn't supposed to do. I didn't listen. Emily's chest ached at the sight of her mother's face, creased by grief, hollowed by too many what-ifs. She thought of all the years she had spent hating herself for not speaking louder, for not fighting harder, without realizing she had been a child trying to fight a script written by adults. You did, she answered, because the truth had gotten them this far and she couldn't abandon it now. But you're listening now, that's something. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. Forgiveness, if it came, would arrive in slow increments, not as a single grand gesture, but it was a step. Daniel changed too. The boy who had once tried to be invisible in school hallways began to speak up in ways that surprised even him. When kids made jokes about crazy girls or said it was better not to know what went on behind closed doors, he pushed back. Not always loudly, not always perfectly, but consistently. He volunteered to help at outreach events Harris and a few others organized, quietly at first, under generic titles like community safety workshops, because Millstone wasn't ready to call them what they really were. How to see what you're trying not to see. Harris aged visibly during those months. His hair grew grayer at the temples. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened. But there was a steadiness in him that hadn't been there before, a kind of resigned courage. He had spent his career in and out of people's worst days, and this case had fused something inside him, anger, empathy, duty, into a sharper tool. We're going to start teaching kids and parents what grooming looks like, he told the town council one evening, standing under the harsh fluorescent lights. We're going to talk about secrets and boundaries and the difference between discipline and control. Some council members shifted uncomfortably, unused to that kind of bluntness. One of them, a man whose name had once been mentioned in the same breath as the accused but had never been formally implicated, cleared his throat. Do we really need to drag all of that out into the open? He asked. Our town has been through enough. Yes, Harris said simply, that's why. Outside, the seasons cycled. Spring came, then summer, softening the edges of winter without erasing them. Children played in yards again. Teenagers loitered in parking lots. Life, stubborn and indifferent, continued, yet certain things never went back to the way they had been. The woods, for one, few people went there alone anymore. When they did, it was with a kind of wary respect, as if the trees themselves had become witnesses. On New Year's Eve the following year, the town held no official party in the hall. The banner stayed in storage. The lights remained off. Some people celebrated quietly in their homes, watching the televised countdown with the sound low as if afraid of tempting fate. Others didn't celebrate at all. In the Carter house, the television was off entirely. No ball drop. No confetti. Emily and Daniel sat in the living room with mugs of tea, the clock ticking softly on the wall. Louise dozed in her chair, exhaustion finally claiming a few hours. Midnight approached without fanfare. You know, Daniel said after a long stretch of comfortable silence, it's weird. Last year at this time, everything felt like it was about to fall apart and I didn't know why. This year, everything's already fallen apart, but it almost feels, he searched for the word. Honest, Emily offered. He nodded. Yeah, honest. She thought about the way the town used to cling to New Year's like a magic eraser, as if the flip of a calendar page could wipe away everything hurtful, everything inconvenient. It doesn't really work, does it? She said. None of it gets erased, it just waits. So what do we do? He asked. If the past doesn't just go away, she considered the question. Emily no longer believed in tidy answers. But she believed in smaller ones. We remember on purpose, she said slowly. We pay attention, we talk, we believe kids when they say something's wrong. We don't let that doesn't happen here be the end of the conversation. He looked at her, studying her face in the soft lamplight. Do you think you'll ever like New Year's again? She watched the minute hand tick closer to 12, then passed. The world outside did not explode, did not transform. The house remained the same. She remained the same, sitting in the same spot, breathing the same air. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe it'll just be another day one day, not a celebration, not an anniversary, just a day. I hope you get that, he said. She smiled faintly. Me too. Upstairs, in a box tucked at the back of her closet, lay the old Polaroid the narrator in another version of this story might have held up as a starting point. A snapshot of a girl on a porch, caught mid-smile, oblivious to the shape the night would take. Emily had taken it out once since coming home, studied it with new eyes. She had noticed details she had missed before. The way her smile didn't reach her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the slight blur at the edge that suggested she had been shifting her weight, ready to move, to run even then. She had almost thrown it away. Then she hadn't. Instead, she had slipped it back into the box, not as evidence, not as something to be obsessed over, but as a reminder of a girl who had survived more than she should have had to, long before the town ever knew her name. Years later, Millstone would still tell the story of Emily Carter in hushed tones and louder ones. They would say, she vanished on New Year's Eve, because that's where stories like to begin, with a clean, dramatic moment. But the people who had lived it, who had watched the fallout, who had seen the quiet strength it took to stand up in a courtroom and say the words everyone wanted her to keep to herself, they knew that wasn't really where it started or where it ended. It started long before, with small dismissals and ignored warnings, with a community that prided itself on safety so loudly it couldn't hear the danger in its own blind spots. And it didn't end in a verdict or a demolished cabin. It continued every time a mother listened a little more closely to her child, every time a teacher reported something that felt off instead of shrugging it away, every time someone in Millstone chose discomfort over silence. As for Emily, she did not become a symbol on purpose. Symbols are heavy, and she had carried enough weight. She became a person living a life, messy, complicated, stitched together from old pain and new possibilities. She left Millstone for a while, studied, learned, came back sometimes to visit, sometimes to help, sometimes just to sit on the porch steps and watch the way the seasons changed. On some winter nights when snow fell in slow spirals and the world grew quiet, she would still feel the old fear stir. It didn't vanish, but it didn't own her anymore either. She would breathe through it, name it, and let it pass. And if, just before midnight on certain New Year's Eves, a listener stood on that same porch where she once stood and swore they heard the echo of boots on creaking wood, or the faintest thread of a girl's voice whispering in the dark, maybe they did. not as a ghost clinging desperately to a place of pain, but as a memory choosing finally to be seen. Because in the end, that was the truth Millstone had the hardest time accepting and the most desperate need to learn. Forgetting doesn't protect you, it protects the people who hurt you. Remembering, no matter how much it burns, is how you finally step out of the woods and into your own life, not as a missing person, but as someone who came back and refused to disappear ever again. If this story resonated with you, please like this video. Your support means everything to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the powerful stories we have in store. We've got many more stories about strong people facing difficult fates, stories that may just change the way you look at the world. Share this video with friends because someone right now might need to hear exactly these words. Remember, you owe nothing to anyone except yourself. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you like the story? Where are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support, and I can't wait to read your comments. On the screen, you'll find 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more to come on the channel, so subscribe and stay tuned for the next story. With love and respect, see you soon.